Appropriations Subcommittee, the House Appropriations Committee. And I appreciate everybody coming. I think this is turned on. It's turned on. Okay. And I think that one is turned on. These meetings, just as housekeeping, these are I don't know what you call internet broadcast, I guess, and they also archive the meetings so they can be accessed by the public later. So when you, I'll ask the committee members to make sure that to remind me if I don't have your mic turned on, turn your mic on, and also for those who come to make presentations, if you'll make a presentation at the presentation mic over there, and just so that I had a meeting last year. I didn't realize that we had some conversation back and forth between people in the audience, and then when they went to look at the archive, you couldn't hear any of that. So I just want to make sure it's all. I'm doing this per my instructions from the Internet Broadcast Department, I love the comment. So first of all, we have. I appreciate the committee members coming today. I appreciate everybody that's here. And first on the agenda is the governor's office, presentation of the governor's office. On the 06, we're doing the 07 amended budget. We're not doing anything at this time with the 08 budget. This is purely the 07 amended budget.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Shelley Nickel, the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. It's a pleasure to be here presenting to you this afternoon. The 07 amended budget for the Governor's Office. In the Governor's Office, there is the Governor's Office proper, the Office of Planning and Budget, and 9 attached agencies. Several of those agency heads or fiscal officers are also in the audience, and I'm sure would be willing to speak to you about specific questions if I can't answer them. The tracking document, we are on page 31. The Governor's Office. As you can see, there are only 3 items that are related to the Governor's Office in its entirety. The first item is the deletion of the $50,000 of transitional gubernatorial funds that were not needed due to Governor Perdue being reelected. So we have taken those funds out of the 07 base budget. The second item is the creation of a governor's litigation fund. Came to light last year that there needs to be some sort of a fund created to handle outstanding litigation bills that agencies don't have in their base budgets. So this amount is based on funds that have already been billed to 3 agencies in particular.
I'm sorry. What now? If you would tell us, and I'm sorry to interrupt. What page are you on? Which document?
Page 31
of the governor's.
21.
What were you using? Page
12 and 21.
Sorry, I have 31 of 54.
It tracks with yours.
Okay.
Okay.
Just the wrong page number?
Thank you.
I apologize. Shall I start over? Okay. Litigation fund. It's 3 agencies are included in outstanding bills due to lawsuits. The DNR with water litigation, Department of Education with the adequacy lawsuit, and the Secretary of State for voter ID. Those bills have been received, and the agencies do not have the funds in their budgets to handle those extraneous lawsuits. The third item that you find on this page relates to the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, and this is funding for the State Operations Center, $125,000 to make sure that they can have uninterruptible power during a disaster. Those are the 3 items recommended in the 07 amended budget. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director. I don't see any questions. Anyone on the subcommittee have any questions? I don't see any.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We have, next on our agenda is the Secretary of State's office and attached agencies. I'd like to welcome our new Secretary of State.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. Appreciate the chance to be here for this agency. It's going to be fairly simple and straightforward for the amended FY07. You can refer to House Tracking Document, the Secretary of State section, which is section 41, page 18. And I'll only highlight two items from there. First, as you know, the New Georgia Commission conducted, yes?
18 and 21 on our.
It's the House Tracking Document, yes. Yes. First, as you know, the New Georgia Commission did conduct budget reviews of all the agencies to identify savings. Within the Secretary of State's office, they identified approximately $64,000 of savings. The governor's recommendations recommend that we be allowed to be allocated back approximately $32,000 of that 64 to do an upgrade to some computer systems in the Securities Division. That's roughly $23,000 and $9,000 for some additional new computers throughout the agency. The second item involves the Archives Record Center and carryover funds. As you know, rather than provide direct funding for this area as an appropriation, we adopted, per the governor's recommendations, a fee-based system where we charge the agencies to actually use the record center. However, and it is fully funded through that, but what happens is when we do the billings at the beginning of the budget cycle, the agency's payments sort of trickle in during the year. So we find ourselves in a deficit for the first month or two, and what I'm asking is your support in having carryover funds of that specific line item, not any other carryover funds, only for that. It's $40,000, which would allow us to start the year to be able to meet payroll, do maintenance and repairs, to actually conduct that service so that we're not moving money around from other areas of the agency to cover that in the short term. That would allow us to accomplish that. Lastly, I think we do have representatives from each of the Secretary of State's offices attached agencies, Jeff Ledford from the Real Estate Commission, Rick Thompson from Ethics, Sylvia Wagoda from the Holocaust Commission, and Rick Atkins from the Drugs and Narcotics Commission. They're happy to answer questions on their respective budgets, and of course I'm happy to answer your questions as well.
I don't see any questions. We do have a question. Governor's Floor Leader, Representative Golick, has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for coming this afternoon. It's great to see you. Just really more of a, and this is for the next time we see you,
sure.
Just to plant a seed on a particular area. I know you've gotten a lot of communications, as we have as well, regarding the voting machine issue.
Yes.
It would be helpful for your office at some point between now and then to just sort of lay out a position as to, and give us a history of sort of where we've been on the voting machine issue, what we did, when, how much we spent, what your thinking is on that issue currently, both in the context of where you are from a policy perspective and in the context of what federal law requirements may be coming down the pike at a time certain in the future. That would give us a good little roadmap about what to do and when, or potentially what not to do and when, if that's not too much of a burden.
No, that is perfect. And if I could comment back just very briefly, when we get to the FY08 budget, I will have a request in there to do an outside audit to begin to do just that, because I think that there are still some unanswered questions. So it's very heavy on my mind. Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
Secretary of State. And, I know that, and you may not be able to answer this because of just, being sworn in a couple of weeks ago. But the money that was identified by the Commission on New Georgia, and we had a conversation with them this morning. I know that's not really their title, but whatever they call them, the ones that work for the governor's office.
Right.
And I was thinking, while you were talking, which was, I can't think and listen at the same time, but there was a certain amount of money that was identified, I think $64,000?
$64,000 within the Secretary of State's agency.
And then there was, and the governor had recommended, or in his recommendation, there's X amount of that, $23,000 or something, to be used for some computer upgrades or
software upgrades and
software
securities,
upgrades.
and $9,000 for to roll out old computers so that we can replenish with new ones.
I was thinking back, and you weren't there, but I'm thinking back to when we had some hearings back in September, and Secretary of State, then Secretary of State Cox came in, and I don't remember. I know that she had the only thing that I recall, and I may be wrong, that she had said that she wasn't asking for anything. I don't think beyond, new or in addition to the current 07 budget at that time, other than she had issued a white paper on the voting machine situation, which she presented to us. But I'm just trying to, do you know how this need was identified to the governor, I guess, for these computer upgrades?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. These were the needs that were identified by Secretary Cox back in September. So this is consistent with the governor's recommendations based on what was.
So did she present that to us in September when we had our hearings? She very well could have done it, and I totally forgot about it. I just don't remember. But did she?
She did present. She was asking for all of it, but
okay.
half of it's been recommended.
That's what I wanted to know.
I think the original request from former Secretary Cox was for the full $64,000. The recommendation is the $32,000, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
Okay. We do have a question now.
Yes, sir.
Somebody has their light on up there. Representative Alice Black.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Do you have a question?
And this doesn't have anything to do with the budget, but I think it's relevant, and some of the others may be interested in hearing the answer to my question. But the contractor's licensing program that we've got coming on board, would you give us an update
Sure.
on where we are and the licensing and testing procedures that
You bet. First of all, I do fully expect for there to be a piece of legislation that will come through. I don't know who is going to actually sponsor it, but there are any number of legislators looking at this. There are some areas of the first bill, last year's bill, that really do need some additional clarification with some further definitions and some fine-tuning of some of the things delineated in the bill in order for the Professional Licensing Board and that particular board to begin to process the actual licenses themselves. We need to have this cleanup bill. So that will be coming through. Our office is watching it closely. We will, as soon as there is a bill, we've been gathering input from our team in Macon, from the licensing board folks. We've also been getting input from various individuals who are affected by the legislation who are calling us. So that's where that sits. I know that many contractors very much proceeded with great urgency to get their documentation to the licensing board. Those things are there on hold until we can get this legislation some clarity there. So that's where that sits. And I fully expect that to come through this year. On the exam itself, the RFP is sitting with DOAS. I spoke with the commissioner just this morning to let him know that time is of the essence with that because we need to move forward so the exam can be prepared, have that vendor selected, and be ready to go with the exams in June or July. And we've already received a call back from him. He was extraordinarily responsive, and they are looking at that to move it forward, so long as obviously there's no issues with the actual RFP itself, and I've not been alerted that there are any, so I expect that to get taken care of this week, and we'll be able to move forward and be on time with the exams.
you got any new personnel working in that division?
Down in Macon, the one change that I have made is we have an acting director of that entire division. His name is Don Mundy. We are in the process of doing, frankly, a national search to find a new head of that division. I spent the entire day with the team in Macon last Thursday. We had a very productive time, spent about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours with the executive directors talking about what's working and what's not working. tracking. And I will tell you, I was very pleased to walk away knowing that both the executive directors and the call center team know that we have a bit of a customer service issue, and they have pledged to me that we will work through it, and that's one of the first priorities there. No matter how long it takes us to hire the new division head, we're moving forward with making those changes now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chairman, I'm looking for the number. Chairman Williams, Chairman of the Regulated Industries, has a question.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary.
Hello.
I'm impressed with your ideas already. I think we've talked about some of them previously, and probably going to talk about some more. And I was impressed with Representative Golick's the roadmap, because I know there's a lot of things. In our committee, we deal with the licensing boards and the relationship that they have, and they're concerned about the lack of adequate investigators to look at violations, and we continue to have amendments to bills and all this sort of thing to kind of correct some of that stuff. And I'm hoping that our relationship, as far as getting that up to speed to further help us out in the areas of violations and this sort of thing, because apparently if they're not being followed, then there's nobody to follow up. So I'm hoping that maybe we can work together, and I hope your relationship is such that you desire the same thing.
Sir, you can do more than hope. You can count on it. Okay. We have brought in place one of the first hires that I made was to bring on Sean LaGrua. She's the former solicitor out of DeKalb County. She is the Inspector General for the agency now. That is a new position that we were able to fund with existing funds. I turned one of the other Deputy Secretary of State positions into this Inspector General. She has a very strong prosecutorial and investigative background. She is right now working with each of the investigative components of the agency to assess where they are. She's also going back and looking at a number of key cases. Candidly, a lot of them are in the elections division right now, but we will be reforming and making some changes in that entire area so that we can be a little more aggressive in how we pursue the investigation, so that we can have appropriate accountability on the part of individuals who are not following whatever it is, the licensing laws, elections laws, security laws, you name it. I'm serious about accountability, and that's the direction, and I'll be happy to keep you posted on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary of State. We appreciate you coming and making the presentation. But before you step down, I want to make sure that I have not overlooked anything. You did not ask for anything above and beyond the governor's recommendation. Is that correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, and we're honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I look forward to working with all of you.
I know we have, I think, at least a couple of the attached agencies, the Secretary of State's office. Elections or ethics, do you have anything? And I know we have the Holocaust Commission. Real estate. Real estate, did you have anything? No. Sylvia Wagoda, do you want to make a presentation?
Just like to say good afternoon, and we have a small amount that was put in the governor's budget, $24,000. We moved to the old courthouse on the square in Decatur, and this covered moving and postage expenses.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
I do not see any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Wish you. How's everything going there?
It's going fine. It is. We've had a lot of traffic because it's on public transportation. It's easy for people to get to now, and it's being very well received.
What are the hours?
The hours, Monday it's closed to the public, but
Okay.
we're working. Tuesday through Thursday, it's 10 in the morning until 5. On Friday, it's 10 until 4. On Saturday, we're open from 9 until 1, and Sunday from 1 until 5.
Okay.
And we're hoping that all of you will come out. We're putting together something special for the House and the Senate to come see what we're doing there.
We'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you could. We're going to make the buses available, but you certainly can get on the train. You get off of the train, and you're in our back door. Just walk right in.
Thank you. Any other attached agencies, Secretary of State's office, have a presentation? Okay, we're actually a little ahead. Is the Revenue Department here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
How do you do?
Good. How are you?
Welcome. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you having us.
Today?
Pardon?
The commissioner couldn't make it today?
He was. He's right here. I'll say right here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate you coming. Just as a recap, I don't know if you were in here or not, we're covering we're only reviewing the 07 amended budget today. And if you refer to a document, if you would just let us know which one it is, and we may or may not have it, but and what page on that particular document that you're looking at, so we can try to find it on the material.
We appreciate being here today, and with respect to the amended 07, Chris Walker, our finance director, will probably be as helpful as I will at responding to specific questions. But from my review of what's here, other than the additional funding for the retirement of the county government officials, everything else is as was originally in the budget, except for some Commission for New Georgia cuts as it relates to savings that we should garner from some of the activity from the Commission. Is that accurate?
And the one cut to homeowners tax relief grants that we're projecting a slight surplus there, and we did offer up a cut there to make sure that we.
I just want to make sure. I want to make sure that, and I suppose you're going to do that, but I want to make sure that we look at those individually. Let us find them. Okay. So if there are any questions or anything we need to take a look at, I want to kind of take a little bit ahead of time anyway, so we can take them kind of slow. Okay. I want to make sure that. We review this very carefully.
How about if I let Chris just take us through the specific items? I'll stand right
That'd
here.
Be fine.
And then if I need to weigh in on the policy direction of it, I'll weigh in. Why don't you just show them what document you're on? And unless they don't have it.
Yeah, they don't have this. Okay, the first cut here.
Tell them what document you're on page.
I'm looking at the tracking sheet and looking at page 17 of 21, and I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, I'm having to reconcile this to the governor's budget rec.
Well, just take it, just take it slow, because we want to make sure that we all know what we're looking at here.
Okay. The first item here under the common changes is a combination of Commission of New Georgia savings, reducing regular operating expense in the admin program, the tag and title registration program, and the revenue processing and tax compliance programs, and that's a reduction of $252,503.
Okay.
Okay. The second is basically a non-monetary effect of redirecting those same savings, I believe, to the local tax officials' retirement program.
Okay, now where is that?
That's the second one right below on 40.2.
It's buried within the text in the lecture.
I see it there. Okay.
The third item on the list is to reflect unclaimed surplus in homeowners tax relief grants. That's the $5,000. $5 million, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And then 40.5 shows the additional funding in conjunctions with those savings already outlined for the local tax officials' retirement of $1,364,084.
Okay, now I don't understand that already.
Okay, it means that they're adding $1,364,084 to our budget, as well as allowing us to utilize part of those savings from the Commission of New Georgia cuts to bring us up to date and true up our retirement system bill based on the local tax officials' retirement that we're required to pay.
Okay.
Let me, if I may say one thing in relation to that item. During one of the joint appropriations presentations or budget meetings in the Capitol last year, Representative Harbin asked either Shelley Nichols or Tommy Hills, could we not get this trued up once and for all and keep it constant, current year in and year out? It actually takes a little more than this $1.6 million to do that, but the $1.6 million gets us current for up to the prior year. This was a joint request, not just on the behalf of the department, but in a conversation or in a presentation where Representative Harbin asked the question that we get that current. Again, this is the retirement benefits that the state pays on behalf of county government officials, tax officials.
Okay. We may want to come back to it, but I appreciate that.
Okay. And that's all of our amended.
I've got some questions here, and I may have some questions too. And I was supposed to be looking to see who gets their light on first, and I didn't. I got at least two questions. I'm going to go with this side first. 24. Who was that?
It's me.
Okay, Chairman Smith.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Representative Smith, I was going to tell your commissioner that you probably should get a raise since you stepped in to cover for him while he was out.
Thank you. He's gotten a couple of raises already since we took him from the GVI.
And then I'm just curious as to the life of our tobacco funds. I know that's reflected in our source of revenue, and it's not an answer I expect from you right now, but when we're looking at the budget and we see tobacco funds and state general funds, I'm just curious as to how long there's projections for that to last.
We'll take a look at that. Go ahead.
There may be a two-part question there that we may need to get some help from One Georgia. Are you asking about the multi-millions that end up funneling through One Georgia, which I'm on the board of? This is money that's appropriated to us for the work that we do on underage tobacco enforcement, working with DHR.
Okay. All right.
And so
that's a two-part question.
I said the word appropriate. That's actually grant money. I think that comes back to us.
It is a grant.
Surely that fund has a life, though, and that's
the other
where
tobacco
I'm
fund.
going.
Well, it does. When I first came to work for the governor back in January of '03, at that time the legislature was discussing monetizing the tobacco settlement fund in a one-time lottery-style payment,
Right.
which most people were under the impression that you would get 90-some cents on the dollar. Well, that would be true if the fund lasted the full 30 years.
Right.
But if you monetize it, you're only going to get $300 or $400 million up front, and then if the fund didn't last beyond that, it would be gone forever. And the states that have monetized theirs have spent it. They generally spend it all in 1 year, and it is gone. But there's erosion in the tobacco settlement business because of the off-brand and generic brand products that are coming in the market, and they're not in the formula for what the major tobacco companies have to pay in their settlement. I'll ask Nancy Cobb at One Georgia if they, working with the Attorney General, have any other recent update. That's just my general knowledge of the subject, and we can get it forwarded to you.
I appreciate that. I was curious about that. And then the second question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Does the state of Georgia track the federal government in the statute of limitations as to when we can collect our revenues? Someone asked me that, and I didn't know the answer. So I was just curious as to, and I don't expect an answer now either, but I was just curious as to how we operate as a state with our limitations. And
most of ours, it is by state statute,
and
but
I'm
I don't know
not expecting an
how
answer.
exactly they track from the federal perspective. We do generally try to track federal legislation as often as possible. Let me get a comprehensive answer to that. Most things in Georgia, especially as it relates to with trust taxes like sales tax and withholding tax, if we have not protected our position along the way, it is statute barred after 3 years.
And then for someone who owes the state money, how long is that statute of limitation?
That's what I was referring to.
Okay,
It's
all right,
3 years.
All right, thank you. And then for an individual or for sales tax or for...
Let me get you a more
And I know
precise
that's
answer
a
about
raw,
tax
it's an
time.
open-ended question, but I would be interested just, as we're trying to, in your efforts of trying to collect the revenues, be interesting for our panel, I think. Thank you.
Are you finished?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Representative Golick had his light on. I'll go back to Chairman Williams.
Just a very brief question. I know you must have answered this before. I've just never heard the answer myself, or was never in a forum where it was answered. Just with regard to the state picking up the retirement tab for a local tax official, I'm sure that's done because of statutory mandate. Does Revenue have a position as to whether or not that's something that ought to be kept at this point? I'm just trying to figure out the rationale for that, no doubt then, whenever then was, and how that has application now, and should we take a look at it? Seems like a local responsibility.
It's strictly pass-through money. I mean, we have no access to it. It's just an accounting entry for us as it passes through. I think it probably originated in that the local tax officials in certain capacities work as agents for the state in the administration of state tax law. That's, I think, part of where it came from. Some opt to participate in this plan. I think others are actually, people that have been in office a long time have actually been able to participate in two plans, both their local plan and the state plan. But I've never done, since it's not an active program of ours, I've never looked deeply into it. And I don't know if there's what percentage of those participating are able to benefit from both plans.
I'm maybe misunderstanding. I'm sure that I am misunderstanding something, but surely you wouldn't have officials that are having dual retirement plans, as in double.
I have not seen it, but I've heard that before. But I've not seen it, specific evidence of it, because I just haven't looked into it.
Yeah.
But we would gladly welcome that just being a relationship between any government that was participating and the ERS system directly rather than passing through us. Seems like we could solve the agency relationship with just a letter agreement, ceding it over to ERS and making it a lot cleaner.
Has that inquiry been made any time recently?
It's been made, but it requires somebody to take it up as an initiative to close the transaction, which hasn't been done.
I understand all too well. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, Chairman Williams.
Follow up on that, Commissioner. Is that item that comes in from the retirement from the local officials, is that reflected in your revenue budget, showing those funds come and then you pass it through to the retirement system?
As far as I know, it is, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is.
It's part of our operating fund.
It's a fund. It's appropriated to us annually. The problem is the appropriation is not equal to the bill that we're receiving for retirement system on behalf of those local officials. And this is to catch up those amounts by which we're in arrears. So we haven't had the money in previous years and previous administrations to actually pay the entire bill that we received from the retirement system. So this actually brings us up current to date through FY 2006.
If it leveled itself out, what would be the tab each on an annual? Would it be that much every year?
No, sir. Right now we're underfunded by approximately $780,000. Now the catch to that is we don't know how to forecast, the nature of the retirement system's bill, whether it's going to go up or down based upon who's retiring and who's coming on board out there in the pool of individuals that are included.
Wouldn't y'all like to get out of this business and put it over in retirement? Can't we do that?
I'd love to do that.
What would it take, legislation or?
Yes.
Okay.
It's my understanding it would.
Okay.
One thing that I would want to make sure everybody understands is that certainly no time since I've been in the department, and to my knowledge, no time ever has the department ever tried to redirect any of that money for our own use. It's all can be accounted for as is.
One other question. On this $5 million on this homeowner tax relief grant, how did that money come about?
The surplus?
Yeah.
It originally, off the forecast that has historically been made from our local government services division, which is a combination of the old sales, part of the old sales tax division of the department and the property tax division, based on where they think new homestead development growth will come in the state year in and year out. The prior year was substantially larger than that. What we've decided to do this year is we're going to figuratively employ Ken Hegney, the governor's state economist, to help in that, to try to put a more scientific approach to that forecast rather than what heretofore has been somewhat of a hockey stick type. Well, if we had this many this year and Georgia's a growing state, we'll estimate there are going to be this many more. But we'll do it a little more scientific to pin that down a little bit narrower than it is. It's, $5 million on the 400 and some million budget is still probably a larger deviation than probably ought to be there. We could do with using Ken Hagney's help.
Is this money that's sitting out there that homeowners, how is that money appropriated?
Each county has to file a claim for their share of the HTRG, and that which goes unclaimed becomes the surplus. So they file an original digest, then they file a claim for HTRG, and based on what isn't claimed is what then is left as a surplus.
Okay.
But the assessment is made, and the estimate's made on the state as a whole, not so much trying to pin down a specific projection for each county.
Okay. So you're on your estimate here, then we're talking about $3,888,000 reduction, the governor's recommendation of cost savings, of reduction on the 07 budget.
Right. I mean, that does put pressure on us to make sure we realize those savings. They made the position based on their analysis of what the state should save and which parts attributable to the department. This puts the onus on us to realize those savings and not redirect them to some other program just to spend the money, so that we don't go back and do what I found when I first got to the department, looking through our warehouses where we had 3 and 4 tractor trailer loads of envelopes with a postal address that we can't use anymore because we moved out of the TW building. That pins us down to do that. One thing I did want to clarify, too, on the HTRG, on that surplus, is that question gets asked often throughout the year. Well, counties are allowed to file their HTRG anytime after July or August. And so we'll get HTRG claims from August all the way well into next year. In some cases, it'll actually extend beyond this fiscal year in a few rare cases. And we still allow them to come back and claim for it when they get the information together. And so our ability to have an actual surplus estimate that's reliable in October is far weaker than we can do today. And it'll be even closer, a month from now or 2 months from now. But this is a pretty reliable estimate given how far along we are in the process this year. But there's still, I think, 20-plus counties that have not filed for theirs this year. But even accounting for those, this is the surplus we expect to have. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay.
We talked about this morning, and I commend you for showing this up as a savings and not redirecting it. We talked to one Georgia commission this morning about these cost savings that they're coming up with, not to get those redirected and kind of distort the budget for 08, that you don't take advantage of those reductions, and the cost reductions they've already realized.
Well, thank you. I learned in my first few weeks of working with the governor, actually before he took office, that he believes in skin in the game, and this is just one way to verify it.
Okay. Representative Black, you have a question?
I was just going to give a little more explanation on that box stuff. I'll talk to her private. I can talk to her about that.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? I wanted to ask. I'm just kind of intrigued. We had the implementers, I guess you call it, the New Georgia recommendations in here this morning. I'm still, there's $250,000 of savings that have been identified. I'm still intrigued by how would they, being outside your department, how did they recognize, how did they identify that as being savings in your department?
What they did is they took projected savings like from the vehicle management and procurement management, and when they rolled up what they forecast the state is going to be able to save based on more streamlined operations, it's reconciled down to the actual department and the impact that it has on the department, like how many vehicles we may have given up in that exercise. Mm-hmm. And then they just redeploy that number here as to what our pro rata share would be. I guess you could probably get them an accounting for how what categories of the commission's work.
Well, it was a combination of real estate rentals, contract renegotiations that have occurred or are occurring at this time. And telecom, of course, a reduction in telecom through new negotiations and a new cost scale there. So it's really threefold: the telecom, the contract renegotiations, and the real estate.
Yeah, and then some of it is not realized yet. And we still have to do our best to make sure that we realize it. Even if it doesn't, with the way this is structured, even if it doesn't come from how they estimated it, we still have to come up with that kind of savings in the department in order to fund the recommendation the way it is. So there is a burden on it.
It makes me wonder, Chairman Brown, who's not here this year, but with his work with the Department of Community Health and DHR, he would do that same. I'm wondering if we need to do that same thing. We could project some savings in your department. I mean, if they could project it, we could project some savings, and maybe that needs to be cut from your budget.
Well,
maybe we could project another $250,000. I mean, this is savings you haven't realized. I'm not sure, but we couldn't project another $1 million. Well, we think you're doing that great a job.
Well, unless you may be willing to spend time in the operations of the department to identify specific areas. That's what's happened in this case, is they've identified specific areas, specific line items of expense to be reduced. We could always do another projection and say next year you're going to have X amount less to run the department, and that is another way to do it.
Okay.
But what would be helpful, I think, is if Chris will prepare a list of the specific categories where that $252,000 is designed to come from.
I would appreciate that.
Where we, and in some cases, we're not waiting for them to tell us what they're doing and its impact on us by having centralized purchasing or things like that. And we're doing a lot of things on our own to streamline things within the department too, like only having one contract for LexisNexis legal search as opposed to having 6 subscriptions to it. When we did that, we saved $42,000 a year. That was done 2 years ago, but we've gone through a whole series of that. When I first got to the department, we renegotiated every lease, every cell phone contract, who had it, every magazine, across the board before we went forward.
Okay. I appreciate that. And you're not the only department. I'm really not picking on you. I'm just trying to, as we have the departments come, the agencies come, there have been things identified, and really just trying to understand that. Maybe it's not as difficult as I'm making it, but I'm having a hard time understanding how that.
Well, an example of where that number should have come from is if we're operating with 8 or 10 vehicles less this year than last year, they make an assumption for the maintenance cost put to each vehicle each year, 8 or 10 times $2,000 in operating expenses a year, plus gas, reduction in gas expenses. That's the kind of reconciliation that should drive that number, and Chris should be able to help give you that.
And it has to be, those savings have to be cross-referenced to an actual New Georgia recommendation. There's going to be savings for different reasons,
sure.
But it's got, in order for it to be valid in that respect, it's got to be cross-referenced to some proposition that they had made. And this $1,000,003 for the retirement for local tax officials. Now, what you're saying is, and that wasn't in this is the 07 amended budget. It wasn't obviously in the 07 budget that we approved last year, and I don't remember any requests being made for it or anything. But you're saying based on a statement that Chairman Harbin made is the reason that y'all have made that request for that $1,000,003?
Well, that contributed to it. We've been wanting to get it caught up for years. Every year that I've been there, we've been wanting to get it caught up. He asked the question to couch it so that we no longer would have to spend time on something that's a pass-through item at this level. Or it should be where it originates or where it goes, like ERS should have a dialogue as to whether or not they participate in the program and what the obligation the state should bear, and that is.
Okay.
But again, to get us current, it's $1,006,000. So the governor recommended funding 136 and getting to the 1.6 with the 252 savings.
Okay. But you made the request to the governor or to the you made a request to the governor in the budget process, kind of based on, you knew that you're behind.
Right.
Chairman Harbin had made a statement that we ought to go ahead and catch up, and that kind of precipitated that then.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it was in the joint appropriations room.
I
hope somebody else recalls it, or maybe we can get it.
I'm not doubting it. I'm just trying to trying to. I mean, it's not. That's not a. It's, the whole budget is not a whole lot of money, but for any ordinary citizen, that's a whole lot of money. Mm-hmm. And just trying to, trying to figure it all out. Chairman Williams has a question.
One last question that altogether different, and I think I know how this may work, but I just want to find out for sure. The bill we passed on the sales tax of collected on out-of-state sales of vehicles, I understand it's brought in something like $78 million since that thing was passed. And that money comes into the Revenue Department, but then it says it's a pass-through to the general fund, and then the governor, whoever has the privilege of spending that where he wants to. How does that?
That's correct. It all goes to Treasury.
All goes to Treasury.
All goes to Treasury. It's a combination of that program. I wish we could get all the county tax commissioners to voluntarily join that program. We still have a number of county tax commissioners who refer their customer over to one of our 11 statewide field offices, which obviously grows discontent. And we pay the county's vendors compensation a few percentage points in order to do that service if they participate. Some still want. Some of the Metro Atlanta counties won't do it. And what their preferences are on some of the support they want for things. Right. Probably the most, that's a large dollar, but probably the most impactful program that we've had is when the governor recommended 2 years ago and the General Assembly supported the 9 temporary workers we have in our Rome office, where we had accumulated sometime from in the late 90s up through 2003, over 300,000 taxable vehicle transactions that were untaxed, with no capacity to work them. That group has now engaged over 200,000 of those 300,000 transactions and collected over $22 million for the cost of about an average of $30,000 to $35,000 an employee. So that's been a well-funded and well-done program, so we appreciate the help on that. And some of those, I got one the other day that it actually was a transaction that was almost 9 years old. But people knew it was taxable, and generally when they engage us, we're waiving the penalty if they respond to our notice. That we're all really interested in the tax. We're not trying to just take every dollar we can take from everybody.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I think that Representative Golick had you pass in 23. Is that Chairman Smith? Okay.
I know somebody's not going to let me out of here without a question.
Representative Sims, Vice Chairman of Ways and Means, Sims.
Just one question. This basically is a generality. What is your thought if we do get a moratorium lifted on sales tax on internet sales? And how's that going to impact us, and how's that going to help us? I'm very interested in that. As you well know, we're over in Ways and Means looking at shifting taxes and where we're going to go and what we're going to do with tax associations, whatever. And just wanted to know your opinion on it.
I would respectfully like the opportunity to craft out my thoughts on that and give them to you in writing. That's the first I'd heard that question, that somebody was seeking a moratorium on the internet taxation.
It's just they've had a moratorium up there for a while now, and of course I get a lot of retailers that are saying it's not really fair locally. We have to pay a 4% state sales tax, and then you have your Lawston and SPLOST taxes and the e-SPLOST down in your local communities, and that's anywhere from 7 to 9% sales tax. When you have a sale on the internet that has no tax whatsoever, it does put those local merchants in a disadvantage. And I just wondered your thoughts as to how fair is that, and do we need to start looking at our congressmen and trying to lift that more?
Well, as robust as Georgia's economy is, there are not that many retailers that are able to do business in Georgia anymore that don't have nexus here and aren't obligated to collect the sales tax. The only other part the reason I'd like to respond in writing is a lot of times people talk about the sales tax that's related to the service of providing internet sales capabilities. And so I'd like to make sure we segregate that answer. But I don't. I mean, in response to your question, I think any company that has Nexus here should be obligated to pay sales tax, collect and pay sales tax. But, are there some instances?
I understand that the collection part is the problem, but,
Well, I don't mind. We can go wherever we need to collect it. I'm not worried about that. I can handle that piece of it. It's more on the policy front of equitably treating people.
I'd be interested in that if you could get that to
Yeah. Last year there was one piece of legislation passed that would allow one retailer to continue to actually open a store in Georgia and not have to collect tax on its internet and catalog business, which is in the opposite direction of your question here today. And I took a pretty firm stance in that situation.
I think some of us did. I don't know. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you if I could. Do you have a question?
Yes, Mr.
Chairman Smith, go ahead and ask yours.
My question also goes to internet sales and to agreements that several states in the United States are making with each other. And part of that process is that they agree to standardize their tax collections. And so as we get into this debate, I just want to make sure that as we get out into that area of internet equity, we are also going to be changing the picture of what happens to our tax collections in Georgia. Then there'll be concessions we have to make as a state to enter into this internet collection, so to speak. I know there's an agreement several states have reached, and I don't have the specific title or anything right now, but that's just a concern of mine.
Sure, and that's related to the streamlined sales tax agreement, that we are an observer state in our capacity there. But with the governor's new position on the executive committee on National Governors Association, they've recently adopted or put to vote a new policy statement as it relates to the streamlined sales tax agreement. And once I get confirmation that that's been passed and what their new policy is on what states intend to do in that area, again, we'll add it to the list and get it redistributed to y'all. In order to be a member of that, the state ultimately has to adopt the provisions of that, and that will require some change in our tax code in order to get in compliance. But that can only happen when the General Assembly votes for the tax law change.
Exactly.
The executive branch in no way, shape, or form can obligate the state to any particular policy, just the support of a policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I wanted to ask, and I'm sure members of the committee understand this better than I do, on this homeowners tax relief grant, the language says reflect remaining unclaimed surplus in the homeowners tax relief grants, reflect the remaining unclaimed. Why would it be, I can understand why it would be shown as a $5 million credit now. I mean, if it wasn't already in the 07 budget, why in the 07 amended? If it was already there, why are we showing it as a $5 million savings? I mean,
Well, I think
what's changed? What changes between today and the day that this is, if it remains this way, the way it's signed by the governor, what changes to make that $5 million to be shown as?
It's $5 million that goes unclaimed, which would otherwise lapse, so it sends it back to the Treasury.
It's projected to be unclaimed at this point as we project out to the end of FY07.
Okay, but you didn't project it out. When we did the 07 budget last year, it wasn't projected.
Correct.
Because, like I said earlier, at that point we had no information for this year's claims by county governments as to how much they were going to claim.
Okay.
And since they file it one at a time starting in August or September, our ability to produce a reliable estimate or more accurate estimate gets better and better the further the year goes along. And now some 120 to 130 counties have made their claim, and this is what we project would be left based on that. The other thing that was impacting the projection last year and this year when the projections were first made is it wasn't until last year that we stopped the creation of special tax districts, which allowed counties that exercised that option to get a bigger share of HTRG. In one case, in 1 year, I mentioned, I think last year, the Marietta Cemetery was the beneficiary of like $1.5 million in the HTRG claim. And that probably wasn't the intent of HTRG and homestead relief. That was just one example. There were many others. One of the biggest beneficiaries of special tax districts was DeKalb County. They were getting an extra $19 million in their HTRG. They were going to special tax districts, so maybe a fire district or a library or a cemetery.
Okay. Now you have in your operation, obviously you have a lot of money that flows through with the sales tax and so on. How much money actually is distributed back to the counties and cities, or just counties that get? I guess the counties and cities get sales tax back. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know the answer off the top of my head how much goes back to the counties. And I mean, we get 4% for the state sales tax, and the other counties are anywhere from 1 to another 4% if you're city of Atlanta. So it's about a like share, but roughly 35 to 38% of the revenue we raise every year or collect every year is sales tax derived money. So I could back into it something on the order of magnitude of 6 or 7 billion is probably 6 billion is sales tax, and so roughly about that much would go back out to the, well, not that much, about 2/3 of that would go back out to the counties. Would you get him a reconciled answer specifically?
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
I had one thing for Representative Black.
Okay.
We have figured out how to take a commercial check in IRP since your last inquiry. And that wasn't by just telling somebody to do it. We actually went back and analyzed what the impact was and how they were. And it was a policy call at the supervisor level as opposed to at the executive level. And we figured out how to make that happen. Well, that and the combination, once that gets, we get that active and online where people can register online with electronic check, credit card, or and that will be up this calendar year. And so we hope your constituents see some relief in that.
If we were looking to, which we're always doing, we're looking to save taxpayers money, what could you identify to us in your department that we could cut, say, $2 or $3 million in this 07 amended budget at this time?
I get in trouble, I tell you, the local government officials participating in the plan.
I'm concerned because, I'm a vice chairman, and although I'm appointed by the speaker, I still have an association where the chairman of the appropriations is still, in a sense, my boss. So I would be very careful about myself recommending we cut something that he recommended he put in. So I'm looking for something besides that.
The best way, I think, with all the work we've done to renegotiate contracts and eliminate contracts, we've closed some offices and consolidated where we already had lease space that we couldn't close or cancel. The biggest impact on us is the formula that drives our GTA expenses, both telecommunications and IT. That's the biggest impact. And what we found in the last 2 years is the more that we're doing on our electronic e-file, e-pay platform, it's causing us to grind more data. And the more we do in collections work, every time we engage and deal with an account, it causes us to grind more information on the GTA backbone, and that runs our bill up. So if you look at an isolated case of our GTA charges and our telecommunication charges, they are growing fairly substantially. It's because of the collection work that we're doing. And just the way that formula is driven. I mean, GTA has a purpose, and it's a sound purpose, and I'm not quite sure what size surplus that they have there, but part of that surplus is borne by agencies like us grinding as much data as we're grinding on their platform.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate you coming. We're honored to have you here today. Everything, your office has been, I know from my standpoint on constituency services, has been great to work with. They've helped me with a couple issues with constituents this year, and I appreciate it. And everything I hear, that you've done over there has been, as far as streamlining operations and trying to make sure that we get the revenue in the state, has been very positive. And I hope you don't think that, our job is to try to create the best budget that we can, and when we're looking for money to cut, it's nothing. I mean, it's nothing personal against you or against your department or anything at all. But that's our job, and we're working trying to create a budget that's best for the people of Georgia, because they are the taxpayers, as you know very well, because you're bringing revenue in from us. But that's our job, and that's what we're trying to do, and I know you understand that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We would like to, as we get into the 08 conversation, anyone who would like to, we're going to reach out and try to plan some meetings to talk about some of our agenda. When we first met earlier in the year, at that point, all we were allowed to promote was a flat budget, but the governor did agree to support in our December meeting 3 initiatives that I mentioned in the joint appropriations presentation, and 2 of the 3 are fairly complex, and so we would like to spend some individual time with each of your members here when they want to, just to make them understand how that's going to be spent and how the way that each project is scheduled and scoped. It would have benefits in the same year it started, that we wouldn't have a 2 or 3 year commitment before you see any benefit from it. And they're all projects that can be stopped at some point along the way. You're not in until you're finished, the way we scoped them out.
Well, we appreciate that, and you think we need, when we go into the 08 budget, you think we need to allow a little more time for you to make that presentation to us?
I think if we have the opportunity to do something, if you have some opportunities to do some of the conversations privately in anticipation of that, then I think the normal time, the 45 minutes will be fine. Okay. And Mac Chandler, who's with me today, he's a coordinator of our government affairs, and he'll be the one trying to schedule the meetings.
Okay. That's fine. We can have meetings. Of course, this whole process has to be a very open process.
I understand.
Obviously.
But it may help you ask more deeper questions because, for instance, there's a lot of different definitions of what a data warehouse is, and there are going to be some privacy issues related to the information that you could go out in the market and buy. We're not interested in buying information. We're interested in subscribing to what's already public information. We want to make sure people understand the difference between the two, so that we don't have any concerns about us trying to access data we shouldn't have.
Okay. No more questions, Vice Chairman Ways and Means Sims. You have no questions. Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate both of you coming
today. And I've got our list that we'll try to get back to y'all timely.
Okay. No, we're still working. We've done revenue. The state accounting office, I know, is here, and
good afternoon, Chairman and representatives. Glad to be here and talk to you today. As you can know, that we have no change request for our budget, and so we didn't have anything to report on FY07. If you'd like me to tell you a little bit about our office and what we're doing, I could do that, or if you want me to sit down because I've taken all the time, I can do that.
No, actually, I think we're ahead of time, and I do. Georgia Building Authority. Anybody? Okay, we do have Georgia. Okay, good, because we can just ask him to talk for about 20 minutes or what. Okay, just make your presentation as you plan to make it. We're just here from you.
I just
thank you.
Kind of remind you a little bit about who the State Accounting Office is. We were, as I believe most of you know, a brand new office for the state of Georgia, created in July of 2005. And we were created because there was no central accounting function for the state. The auditor was doing the financial statements and had a qualification because of independence. GTA was doing the PeopleSoft systems. So on page 2, which ours aren't numbered, we listed our key responsibilities that we were established to provide financial reporting and the accounting system for the state. When we use PeopleSoft, the human resource and payroll system, we run that. We're charged with developing and maintaining policies and procedures for accounting and for cash management improvements. We're charged with that. We're charged with improving accounts receivable in the state and giving direction on that and improving the asset management of the state. Some of the things we accomplished this last year, 2005 was the first year that we got the state's comprehensive annual financial report out in the 6-month period, standard for governments. And this year we put that on the internet last week, and so that we got that done again this year. For those of you who don't know, this is a report that goes to the bond rating agencies, and we have been criticized for the bond rating agencies in the past for not meeting that deadline, and so the last 2 years we've been there. And our plan is, of course, to improve on that, but we had several challenges this year of change to program budgeting and changing the accounting system that we just went through that. We did upgrade the systems. We were behind in our systems significantly to where the systems were not even supported by the vendor. We upgraded the human capital management system, the payroll system in 2005, and we completed the upgrade of the financials in 2006. Of course, that's going to lay the foundation for future enhancements. We implemented employee self-service, employee improvements to implemented management self-service, and we've just scratched the surface. We've just implemented some very basic functionality that's at this point in time, and as we progress in conjunction with other departments, there will be more options for that. One of the big issues for us this year has been the budgetary compliance and program budgeting, and we configured the system to handle that a little better. Before, the system was not really set up to handle program budgeting, and every department was managing that a little different. And then this fiscal year, we have a standard way to keep track of that in the accounting system, at least those agencies on PeopleSoft. And so inter-unit accounting. We just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've been working on and accomplishing this last year. One of the other big initiatives that's happening in the state is we're looking at the state as an enterprise as opposed to siloed departments as we have done in the past. And we're also working with other departments. When we look at enterprise resource planning, that's a IT terminology, ERP systems, which says you got a system that can handle functions for the whole enterprise as opposed to having many systems to do many different things and by many people. And as we do that, most organizations that have been able to do that have been able to streamline their processes and improve. By improving their infrastructure, they have found greater efficiencies. And tried to diagram the working relationships that we've been developing as we've looked at the initiatives in the Georgia Merit System, in the Department of Administrative Services, and in the State Accounting Office. We found that a common solution is this enterprise system and PeopleSoft. And we also determined that as a state organization and as the organizations with responsibilities for these business functions, that it would make sense to have one operation of that as opposed to many. So you have economies of scale from having a single instance of PeopleSoft, single group that can develop the expertise to manage that. And so we have become a service provider for the Department of Administrative Services in the Georgia Merit System in implementing new technologies for their systems. Of course, we're working with the Office of Planning, Planning and Budget, and trying to get communication between the budget system and the PeopleSoft accounting system, because that PeopleSoft accounting system is where people manage their budgets. BudgetNet, where we prepare the budgets and control the budgets from the appropriation side. And so we're trying to get the communication to be more automated and less manual. And the Technology Authority, of course, has the hardware that runs all of our systems. And anytime that I'm gone too long, you just let me know. Okay. And so in that effort, we actually saved a significant amount of money by having a volume purchase by everybody buying at the same time. And we saved at least 17% off the purchase price of the software. And if you go off a list price, we saved 88.5% or 87.5%. But we really would never have paid list price anyway, so that's not a realistic, but from what we could have normally bought, we saved at least 17.5% by working together as 3 departments instead of working individually. Some of the estimates that were given to Department of Administrative Service, and I don't want to make their case for them, but were much higher in what they would expect to have paid to go to other systems than by using PeopleSoft. In workforce management, we've just listed all of the functionality that we'll be implementing there. And this is kind of setting you up for what I'm going to ask you in my 08 budget. But and then, as I mentioned, working with the Office of Planning Budget. We've also found that the change to program budgeting has been a significant change for agencies. We've had a very difficult time this year that we just closed demonstrating budgetary compliance at the expenditure by program by funding source. We can demonstrate that we didn't spend more than was appropriated of state funds. We can demonstrate that the department, they kept track of their programs, but when it comes to demonstrating expenditures in the program by funding source, it was very difficult for us to demonstrate budgetary compliance. The agencies were not used to doing business that way. They didn't have their system set up to do it that way. And there's a lot of training that needs to go on. So we're working with the Office of Planning Budget in a process to understand the problems that they're having, developing improvements to the system and training so that we can get that issues dealt with. But you will find when the budgetary compliance report comes out that will be highlighted quite apparently. There are ways to improve that by allowing the control process to be at a higher level. If you allow the control process to be identifying the funding sources for a program and the expenditures at the program level without having to have expenditure by funding source, that would simplify the process. But if we continue to expect that level of control based on the way the Appropriation Acts have been written, then we have a lot more administrative overhead to do that. So the other thing that we're working on is an asset management system that was approved in the budget last year, and we're working with Department of Administrative Service to implement that, and we'll be recommending in our 2008 budget that those funds be transferred to our office, and that's a cooperative effort with the Budget Office, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and the 2 departments. And what we're trying to say is that we're trying to get the state to have a more efficient way to do business, that we have real-time access to information, that we have a place you can actually get centralized information as opposed to having to get it from every department. We're in process, but we're not there yet. We do have to have the architecture to do that, and that's what we're working on, is building that architecture, and that's why we've been funded for some of these projects, and that's what we're working on implementing. But I'm just giving you kind of a highlight of some of the challenges we're facing, and a little bit of the change in scope that's occurred in our office because of this cooperative effort. And the next page shows you a timeline of when we anticipate those projects. And one of the real challenges in getting statewide data is having multiple systems. And the last page just demonstrates which agencies are using PeopleSoft and which agencies are not. And we haven't listed out all the authorities and commissions in every college, but we've listed those that we think would make sense to move on to PeopleSoft, the others that may or may not make sense. But it takes resources, and we first, of course, had to get the upgrades completed before we could focus any attention on that. That was kind of what I wanted to give you a highlight of what's going on in our office and the things that we'll be working on in the next few years. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation, and I know this has been an ongoing project for you, and I remember when we passed it to separate you from Department of Audit to keep the fox and guard in the hen house, so to speak. As I understand it, this PeopleSoft program, is it going to be implemented in every department? I mean, is that the goal of getting everybody on the same reporting system that would simplify what you do?
If you go to the last page, we've identified I think the central functions of state government should be on the same system. There are different arguments as to whether or not some of the authorities and commissions that are separate, have separate business functions, the value of moving those to that system. And the Board of Regents, the investment and the cost it would be to move those onto a single system are questionable. So what I've highlighted on that last page is the ones in the gray are the ones that I believe should be moved to a single accounting system and a central accounting system. We need to look at the others. Now, I don't have agreement from all of the departments that they think that's the case, and some of them are independent, are separately elected officials, and so, there's some work we have to do. The statute allows us to, requires our approval on systems, but we do need to work with people and help them see the benefits, and we believe that as we enhance the capabilities and functionality of the systems, they're going to want to come a little more than being forced to come. But there may be times when we will have to probably get into some struggles.
It looks like the bulk of the agencies, the majority of them are already on the system.
That's correct. But
this is something I commend you for doing this. This is something I've heard about for 40 years, that the state needs to get on a common ground where you can understand from everybody, and each little department had their own little fiefdom that they didn't want to change, and it was difficult to correspond or to converse with them. And I commend you for doing what you're doing. Hopefully get everybody on the same, in the same hymn book, on the same verse. And now, the relationship you have now with the Department of Audits, is that working, meshing in fine with Mr. Hinton?
Yes, it's a very positive working relationship, and it is, and we will, as we continue to separate those responsibilities, they will have even more independence. They're still tied into the process because of the history they've got. But as far as working with them, it's a great, positive working relationship, and we are going to get more and more value from that independence as we go along.
Now, you're in your scope of you're in the accounting part. Are you basically like an outside audit where you look at the integrity of the office of funds, the balance sheets and that sort of thing, to make sure that in honesty and integrity and that sort of thing is just like a regular CPA audit?
That's Russell Hinton's job.
Okay.
That's the Department of Audits and Accounts job.
Okay.
And we're the ones who are supposed to compile the information. We're like a controller function for private industry. So we're the ones who compile data, set standards, standardize the accounting practices for the state. And even though we have a lot of these many agencies on the state system, because of the history, the application, the uses were still siloed. And so we even have to kind of tear down some of those silos even within the system. But we're the compilers, we're the data preparers. Russell Hinton is the attest function, the validating, making sure that things are fairly presented.
Okay.
Chairman Smith.
Thank you for your presentation, and I'm glad to see that. I can just imagine the challenge you have getting the agencies you have right now on the PeopleSoft, and so congratulations for doing that. I have two questions for you. One, if you'll enlarge on a comment you made that these applications involve more of your time because of legislation that is passed, and I wasn't clear what you meant by that, how we do our appropriations legislation, I think. And then I wanted to ask you about why you felt the Board of Regents should be on a separate accounting system.
Okay, on the first point, the Appropriation Act is the official budget for the state and has identified how we measure and report budgetary compliance. The appropriation in there say identify revenue sources, state general funds, for example, federal funds, and then the different federal, sometimes they'll list individual federal programs and other funds. And because of the way it's put together, each one of those by program, and the way the narrative at the back that defined what an appropriation level was, it said that not only do we have to make sure that our expenditures don't exceed what was appropriated, But we also have to make sure that the type of money we spent in that program is state, federal, and other, all the way to the expenditure level. So, for example, if I buy I buy a case of paper, and if I have 3 funding sources, I have to identify whether I paid for that piece of paper with state funds, federal funds, or other funds, and then I have to report at the end of the year how much of those funds were expended by funding source. So you can see the matrix that goes with that. I mean, that's a real simple example, but when we complicate that with the complexity of a Department of Human Services or Department of Transportation, it's important to know where this funding is to fund a program. That is critical, and we need to be able to do that. But when you have to track every expenditure and show budgetary compliance at that level, it requires significant effort when you track and manage the day-to-day operations, and then reporting and auditing. For the auditor to say, okay, I can tell that this should have been paid for with state funds, federal or other, and it complicates the process. We think it's important to show budgetary compliance that they didn't spend more than they had available in a program, and that's much easier to demonstrate than they didn't spend more in a program by fund source. I don't know if that answered your question, or do you need a follow-up question?
Well, to your question, Mr. Chairman, and to our committee, I think it's always important that we look and contemplate the information that we get. As legislators, we're charged with having to account for how all of this is spent. But if there's a better accounting process that lets us do that, and at the same time meet our fiduciary responsibilities on this committee, and controls our cost effectively, then that's something we should look at. But I can tell you, as having sat on this budget for several years, one of the challenges to members of appropriation is figuring out what's going on, and that has always been our challenge. And so maybe the way we're asking to do it isn't the best way to do it, but the end result has to really be the same. We need to be able to figure out. For several years, we were given a sum at the top of the page that was continuation, and then we just saw the numbers that were new requests. And so our charge as legislators is to be able to account back to our constituency exactly what is going on. But it doesn't mean that what we're asking for is the best way to do that. So I myself would be interested in knowing, as long as we can meet our requirements, what are some other ways.
Right. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that's one of the important parts of government, is to be able to be accountable to the people. And that's one of the important parts of what we do, is making sure that you can, and that there is proper tracking of those expenditures and tracking of the revenues, and making sure that people stay within the limits imposed by the legislature. That's why you build these systems, to help do that and to make it transparent. And we're working hard to get to where it's better.
That's why I applaud your efforts. I really do.
And the governor's budget document, actually not the budget document, but the draft bill that they prepared, is trying to include language that tries to help provide the information you need, but not make it too burdensome, that it gives you a level of detail. It may not be that important in the in the control process. The information and gathering and the information availability is also one of the efforts. We've got our statewide reporting, our data warehouse function that we will be trying to implement, is to also make that information more available to all of you, the users. And then now I've got to get back to what the other question was. It was on.
Actually, it's a good lead into the second part of my question, and I was curious as to why the Board of Regents would not be one of the organizations. I think your point was it would be too complex, but that might be our point. If it is too complex, then please help us understand, because that's been one of our challenges. So,
well,
a little statement there.
The Board of Regents has a certain amount of independence.
And first of all, I'm not intending to put you on the spot, but I'm just wanting to know why if this is appropriate and good for all these other agencies, other than the reason it'd be too complex, why we couldn't do it?
One of the reasons that we kind of put them at the bottom of the list to start with is just the sheer cost of doing that.
Okay.
You're looking at, I'd say, a minimum of $50 million.
Wow.
And I'd say that would be the lowest price.
That helps us understand.
That was one of the reasons we said, could a system do it? A system could, but there are different.
Should, I guess, is the next.
And there are different functionalities with the way the regents operate, with all of their auxiliary funds and things, and the way they, I would say a certain amount of independence, but I don't know that that's really the reason not to. But the complications and the cost were the reasons we put it at the bottom of the list. If the state really wanted to do that, there are a few states that do have your university systems on the same system as the rest of their states. Majority of states do not. But sometimes that's politics more than business. and history. The history is that they've just been independent and have independent systems. And so the majority of states have come up and grown up that way. There are a few states who have not. But I know that's not the complete answer, but
no, it's
that
not.
big dollar sign is one of the reasons we haven't gone there.
And then another possible tack to take would be operating under their existing system, how to give us the numbers that we can use to understand the other agencies.
This is one of the places we do want to go. When we've implementing a data warehouse gives you the capability of collecting data from other systems and putting it into a consolidated place.
That would be great.
And we're that's on a horizon, but that's not going to be the first installation. If you make that project too big, it will fail. It'll collapse on itself before you get it off the ground. But that is one of the objectives, is to pull that data from those systems where they don't get incorporated into PeopleSoft.
I look forward to following that. Thank you.
It's a long-term.
I understand that. I understand, and you've gotten much further already than I thought possible, so I commend you for that.
Okay.
I believe that's all the questions. Okay, we do have another one. Okay, sorry.
Follow up on what you're saying. In regard to the expenditure, you're talking about how complex this accounting thing is as far as the funds, federal, state, and other, and how tedious that was to work. Would there be any reason that we could, the budgetary expenditures that's set in the budget, does it really matter where as long as it stays within that category of expenditure, does it really matter whether it's federal, state, or other funds, as long as it's within the budget? Or does the federal government and the monies that they send to us, do they require an accounting of how their money is spent? Do you have to report anything to the feds? You do? Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of accounting issues for federal reporting. Agencies are required to report what they spend. The states match, the states share of that. And so there's a lot of controls on the expenditures. But what I would recommend is that you identify the type of revenues that are funding a program. Federal, state, and other. Federal is a fixed state appropriation general funds is a fixed amount. It doesn't vary because you control that. Federal funds, they have some variability because you make estimates. You don't know exactly what those are. And, the budgetary process already allows for those to be continuously appropriated if the amount's different than what you estimated. Other funds are variable as well. So you leave those to be variable, but you can only spend what you actually collect. And then you say, here's all the money that I've collected for that program, for funding that program, and here's how much I spent. And it has to be less than or equal to the available funds, state fixed money, and only what you actually collect of the variable funds.
In regards to the relationship the regents are putting them below on the list of this PeopleSoft program, can you work with the regents with whatever reporting system they've got? Are you in cooperation with the regents in getting that information you need for your reports?
I believe we can. We're working with those issues. And Regents does actually use PeopleSoft for the majority of their institutions. University of Georgia has their own system, but most of the others are PeopleSoft, but they're all separate instances of PeopleSoft. So you have one instance of PeopleSoft for, 34 times? But they're configured a little differently, and so you can't just roll them in to one PeopleSoft. They are looking at a PeopleSoft upgrade, and they may go to more of a consolidated model, but that they're still working on, and I really can't speak to how that's coming for them.
Thank you. Okay. Here's another question, 24.
One last follow-up question to what you're explaining about tracking of the federal funds and the years of appropriations and watching that. And I'm sure several of our members know this, but a lot of this is subject to the funding of the federal government and the timing of when they appropriate their monies, and then it meshes with our budget. So I know the complexities you're talking about because it's subject to the legislative action of that body before our body can act, and that's one of the things that has complicated tracking the federal dollars for years. Just want to add to that.
I think you explained it quite well, actually. It is a very complicated process, and it looks like. Do I need to stop because it looks like you need to?
No. I mean, I appreciate you coming, Mr. I want to say, since his department or this agency was basically something was created, 2 years ago?
Correct. Well, I started about 2 years ago. Yes.
I actually forgot to put them on the agenda last year, and he brought that to my attention. I actually wanted and volunteered to come, and I appreciate that.
It is nice to have a budget to work with.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And the Georgia Building Authority had asked to be last. And, man, do we have questions for you.
Well, I've got answers, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Well, the first thing, I'd like to say thank you for letting me be last today. We have been working for the past 2 days on our strategic plan, and we just drove back, just drove back. So thank you for your staff letting us change and be last today. I really do appreciate that. And the second thing I'd like to thank this entire committee for is right now we are not behind on any rent collections. So after last year's efforts, y'all helped us tremendously. So thank you so much for that. We've just recently sent out our January statements, and we're current with all of our agencies. So thank you so much for that help. Well, in the 07 amended budget, the Georgia Building Authority has 4 items. Maybe I should take a step back and just let you know that the Georgia Building Authority last year was changed from being administratively attached to DOAS to the State Properties Commission. So now we are attached to the State Properties Commission in last year's amended budget. The Georgia Building Authority, for those of you that don't know, we run 48 facilities here on Capitol Hill, also 1 facility off Capitol Hill Tradeport building down at the airport where the Department of Revenue is housed, and of course the mansion. We also have 7 Confederate cemeteries. Some people don't know that, so we manage 7 Confederate cemeteries around the state. We have 7,000 parking places on Capitol Hill, which some would say is not enough, and about 4.5 million square feet of office space that we maintain here on the Hill. So we passed out a handout, and we'd like to, if that's okay, just go through that handout very briefly. The first page is just exactly what's on page 81 of the budget document, and I'll take each of those individually and explain what those items are. The first item is $5.7 million to fund the demolition of the state archives. The next page is really related to that. The second item is to increase payments to GBA to fund the maintenance and repair of state facilities. The third item is condition assessments for 17 facilities. And the final item is to look at programming on the Sloppy Floyd building to figure out how we make some repairs and renovations. So it would just be the programming component of that. On page 2 is really just a site map of where the archives building is located, and I'd like to point out 2 additional pieces of property. The archives building, of course, I think everybody knows where that is. It is adjacent to the new Capitol Homes redevelopment project. And across Memorial Drive are 2 pieces of property that I think you'll also see. Those are vacant lots. And what we would like to do is we would like to enter into an agreement with the Atlanta Housing Authority to exchange the archives building for those 2 pieces of property across Memorial Drive. Now, why would we want to do that? I think we've had discussions with some of you individually about the Capitol Vista Plan. This would be the first component of the Capitol Vista Plan, which would take almost a park view across from the Capitol, across the interstate to those 2 pieces of property. So this is kind of our first step. But regardless of that land swap, the archives building is in pretty bad shape, just to be frank about it. If you'll flip to the next page, which is page 3, the archives demolition we're requesting that in cash, because if we did the land swap, if it was a bond package, we would have to pay off that bond amount prior to being able to enter into a land swap. We have already roughed out an agreement with the Atlanta Housing Authority. Of course, it's not signed because it would be unconstitutional to sign something without the funding, but we do have an agreement in terms with the Atlanta Housing Authority on this land swap. It's the acreage on the piece of property is 6.1 acres. The property currently appraises, the archive site currently appraises for $3.67 million. And we, in that appraisal, we also asked for the highest and best use for that piece of property. The highest and best use for that piece of property is actually a mixed-use development, is what our appraisals are telling us. Additionally, our appraisals are also telling us that we would be better off to demolish the building even if we didn't enter into the land swap with the Atlanta Housing Authority. Our property value would actually increase with the building gone. So that's really one of the reasons another reason we also like to look at the demo. The reason the demolition is expensive is because we would have to backfill the hole that is created from the demolition of the building. It has basements underneath it. So that demolition would require backfilling that site with over 300,000, almost 400,000 yards of dirt. So that's an expensive operation in downtown Atlanta. Needless to say, getting equipment onto that site and getting that area backfilled would run about $10 to $12 a cubic yard. So it's an expensive operation. And just to give you an idea of how much that is, one tandem axle dump truck holds about 10 to 12 cubic yards. So we're looking at a pretty expensive operation to backfill that site. The one thing on this land swap is we've already had the 2 pieces of property appraised across Memorial Drive. And even with the investment of the $5.7 million for the demolition of archives, we would still come out about $500,000 to the good. Those 2 pieces of property appraised for over $9 million. So add our $5.7 million, our $3.67 current appraisal, and the state still would gain, would still have a benefit of over $500,000 through this exchange. Again, removal would increase our property value. And if you flip to the next page, we brought you just some photos of some of the prettier sites down at Archives. Just to let you know, there are a couple, in fact, there's some serious structural problems with the facility. We have had an assessment done on the building, and really the only way to there's not really a good way to repair this. It would be extremely expensive to repair this facility. Plus, the building is not really built for anything else but an archive space. The upper space, if we were to put tenants, if we were to put other state agencies in it, we would have to put windows in the upper floors, and we would have to add additional outside staircases because there's no way to exit the top floors of those buildings when you increase that type of occupancy. So it would be an extremely difficult and flat out, just to be frank about it, very ugly renovation in that facility. Some of you may know also that the marble is falling off the side of the building. In 1994, prior to the Olympics, we spent several $1 million pinning the marble onto the outside of the building to keep it from falling. It's still in dire straits. It was just a temporary measure. We are still having parts and pieces of the building, parts and pieces of the marble falling off the building. So there's not really a good way to save this structure. We do have all the structural reports. If you're interested in seeing those, there's probably not too interesting. It's not much of an interesting read, but we'll be happy to supply that to the committee. And we also have the appraisals available for your review as well, as far as highest and best used. And again, the reason we would be asking for that in cash is if we did this land swap, it would have to be paid off prior to that land swap occurring. The second item on page 81 for our budget request is to fund maintenance and repair of state facilities, and that's $3 million. And that is specifically related to the mansion. And just to let you know, we have been asking for funds to repair the mansion. And we, of course, we've not gotten a lot of support for the repair of the mansion. But the next governor who moves in there is going to have some serious problems they will have to deal with. The basement is currently leaking, and we are having to do maintenance and repair work on the ballroom continuously. Right now, the wallpaper is peeling off the ballroom right now, and it is because of a major leak into that basement. And we've already done the reports investigating that. Just the repairs on putting an outside foundation drain around that basement would be about $500,000 to $600,000. So that means literally, we've been waiting to tell the governor that news until after the election, to let him know that we would literally have to dig up all the bushes, the landscaping around the outside basement area in the mansion, around the mansion, and repair that work, put in new waterproofing, and then come back in with additional landscaping. That would just fix the water problem. That does not take care of the ballroom wallpaper that has, because of this water infiltration that's coming off the walls. Some of you may have seen the screening that we've put up temporarily in the ballroom down there, just to take care, just so you don't have to see it. But it's pretty dire straits on the wallpaper and that room. The other thing that we would like to do is repair the kitchen. The kitchen has extremely old kitchen equipment in there that we would like to install new kitchen equipment. It would not include an expansion of the kitchen, just replacing what is actually in there with new equipment. With all the entertaining that goes on at the mansion, which we're also responsible for and involved in, our kitchen staff is begging and has been begging for several years for kitchen repair. And right now we're just kind of bubble gum tape and putting that thing back together to hold it together. So it's in very bad shape. If we don't do anything about the mansion in the next few years, we will lose the use of that ballroom. That wallpaper will continue to peel. You'll continue to get water infiltration into the basement. So we know that we have to do the basement repairs around that facility. The other component of this would be roof repairs. Some of you may have seen the metal roof that is on the building. It's about time to do a roof replacement on the mansion, and we would like to look into that, do the planning and programming for the roof repairs as well. The next item on the agenda, the next item on the budget report is the funding of the condition assessments for 17 state-owned facilities. And let me just say, I'm really excited about this piece, and I hope that the legislature will see fit to fund this. This is something that is extremely important into moving into a true capital asset management strategy. Some of you have asked, do we know what we own as far as facilities, leases, and property? And that's all I've worked on for the past 6 or 8 months, and the answer to that is yes. We now know that we have 1,650 leases in the state. We now know that we have over 16,000 buildings in the state, and we have over 1.1 million acres in the state that's owned by the state of Georgia. And that's just the first piece of moving towards a capital asset management strategy. We that's the first piece to get an inventory. The second piece is to start looking at our facilities that we own and figuring out a way to start prioritizing maintenance repair money. I know there's a lot of money in the budget for MRR across all of the state agencies, and we are trying to be the guinea pig. We'd like to be the first ones out there to do a real condition assessment so we could start working on a statewide process to prioritize MRR. And that is really what this is about, we're asking for funding to do a condition assessment to move towards a long-term asset management strategy. The last item on in the budget request is for the Floyd building. Some of you may know that we have carpet on the walls in the Floyd building. I think some of you have seen that. And that is an environmental issue for us. We get constant requests for people to come over, for us to hire folks to come over and monitor the environmental quality of the Twin Towers. We know that it is a problem, and we would like to start looking at how to get that carpeting off the walls, improve the environmental conditions in the building. That building has not been renovated in over 20 years. Almost 30, as a matter of fact. And we would like to start looking at examining the programming for renovations to the Twin Towers. That would, at least, we would like to start looking in the public spaces, how we would get that carpeting off the walls, how we would handle some of our electrical problems. Some of you may know that we have, in the past few years, added a lot of server rooms, as you can imagine. The state agencies have really grasped technology and really started to ask for additional server rooms in the Twin Towers. So when we did that, we literally added those server rooms, but took up the extra electrical capacity for the building. And by doing that, we literally, sometimes just adding a simple outlet in Twin Towers, we have to go to another floor to get a circuit to support a simple floor outlet. So we'd like to use these funds as well to look at HVAC and electrical upgrades to look at Twin Towers. Another thing you might notice is that people ask all the time, why are the lights on at Twin Towers at night? And the answer to that is, when you flip on the lights at Twin Towers at night after 10 o'clock, 5 floors come on at a time. And that's the way it was originally designed. It was not, needless to say, not designed during the energy crisis, and it was not a problem. But right now, if we have one state employee work late in the middle of the building, it flips on 5 floors at a time. So we'd like to look at ways that we can reduce energy consumption and change the electrical systems in the Twin Towers and look at for lighting upgrades as well. So that's all of our requests, and those sound like not quite so sexy items, but that's my job. And if there are any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Well, unbelievably, I don't see any lights on. Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you. I know I met with you at the end of, or sometime right after you had recently taken over this position. I know you've had a lot going on. Couple of questions. In the process of the budget, of course, what we continue to hear is that department heads in certain situations were not aware of GBA increases, and now they're asking for the increases to be funded in the supplemental budget, which is a little bit contrary to what the supplemental budget was first put into place for. And so we've been questioning as a committee, why did they not know the increases were there at the beginning of the year?
I can explain that. Basically, what we did is we worked with OPB and provided a list to OPB. This year's different, just to let you know. I don't know what the agency heads are telling you, but I can tell you this year's a little bit different than last year. We provided a full detailed list of our requested increase to OPB with all the additional increases broken out by agency, and Joanne Chance and Lisa Payne did that.
Now, excuse me. When you say this year, you're talking about 08?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. What time frame?
Joanne, do you?
Yeah, we did it in September when the budget was submitted.
Right. Now, we're talking here about the 08. We haven't started looking at that yet.
Right. So I'm sorry, Joanne, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we also submitted that list of OPB for the 07 budget request as well.
Okay.
The problem seems to be that OPB, the executive branch, can't adjust.
Do you mind coming up here? This won't be on the internet feed if you're talking back there.
No, come on.
Mr. Chairman, I think the problem stems from the fact that the Office of Planning and Budget does not adjust the judicial branch budget. So they are the ones that tend to not have their budgets increased by OPB to cover the GBA
And
rent
audits.
increases.
Audits also.
Yes.
And audits, yes, sir. Otherwise, we do provide OPB with all of that information in a very timely manner so that they can adjust all of the state agencies' budgets.
And I'd add one thing, too, is that this year, we heard you loud and clear last year, and Joanne has been talking to the other budget officers across the state, letting them know that we are asking for a certain, I guess 67 cents this year in our 08 amended. So our 08 budget. They know that. They know that going in. Now, they can't put that into their budgets, but so you will hear them talk about that, but they are aware that we are asking for a 67-cent increase for this upcoming year.
In regards to the mansion and renovation there, was there anything looked into in regards to the private sector who may want to get their name on a plaque if they fix the basement for the state, or if they did some of this on behalf of the taxpayers?
I know that the First Lady, in fact, has been working on bringing in private citizens to help with some of the furniture repair. We have not touched any of the furniture repair in the mansion at all. All of that has been handled through the First Lady and private citizens. This structural repair is not something that's very easy to sell to private citizens. It's kind of hard to explain a foundation drain system for a basement so that we can continue to use that for the ballroom. So we have not pursued a lot on the private sector side, but the First Lady has, and that is the reason we are requesting these monies, is because we can't seem to get a lot of response, nor has she, on fixing the ballroom. But she has, and I don't know the exact numbers on the furniture, but we get constant requests from them to take a piece out of the out of the mansion to go and have, refinished or those kinds of things, and that is being paid for by private citizens. So we're very pleased. We actually have an inventory system on all of the furniture at the mansion for the first time. So that's been a big help for us too.
Chairman Hill.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Abrams. We do really appreciate what you have done in working. It's been a lot of work for you. It's very obvious, and the results are quite apparent in the budgeting of the other departments.
Well, thank you.
And with the exception of audits and the judiciary, most of the people did take into account fully the increases. I do wonder, though, if we've looked at doing it more like the private sector, where it might be 2-3 year, maybe even 5-year leases, where we anticipate the cost. I mean, as a commercial building holder myself, that's what I do, is I anticipate the cost, and I issue my tenants a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease. And it might be, while we're doing budgeting every year, I can see a lot of reasons for forward-thinking budgeting on these, that they might want to consider having multiple year leases. Is that ever been considered?
I'm glad you asked. This is a great question. This is a really good question. We have been working for a few months, in fact, actually 2 years now, on trying to develop a lease. I don't know if you know this or not, but we actually do not have any leases for any of our tenants in any of the state-owned facilities that are GBA owned. So completely different than the private sector. And we have had discussions with OPB and asked them specifically if we could start sending out, of July of this year, a full-fledged lease agreement for every one of our agencies. And they have agreed to do that. We have a draft document already ready to go. Now, the problem with a 3 or a 5-year lease is that we cannot we can't get them to sign over a single year because of the appropriations process. So that's that's a real problem. But at least we can get them. There's some things that we would like for folks to understand what is their responsibility as a tenant and our responsibility as a landlord. Right now, we fix everything because we've never told them what we would or would not do. And so I'm real excited about this. In fact, we had a discussion about this on our strategic planning conference over the past few days, and that's something that we'll be working towards. But one thing on the leasing agreement, on our outside leases, we are increasing the number of long-term leases. And we are doing that because the Georgia Building Authority has the right to sign 50-year leases. And we are literally, what's happening for some of these agencies is we are signing the lease, GBA is, and then we're turning around and signing an intergovernmental agreement with that agency to pay the rent. We've saved about $8 million this first year in doing that, just on a couple of leases. So we definitely understand clearly that multi-year leases would be the way to go. It's unfortunate that we can't do that with our agencies, but we have found a vehicle in order to do that on our outside long-term leases, on our outside leases. So we're getting there slowly but surely.
Thank you, and I do understand the legal problem on the leases, but perhaps even just so they would have for their long-term planning, even if it's an understanding that in the future it's anticipated that your rents might go up in such and such a manner, even though it's not a total legal document as a lease. I think just giving these departments an idea of what's coming up 2, 3, 4 years down the road is a great idea. And I really appreciate what you're doing on the maintenance, because we're seeing in the various departments, and I know other committees are, requests for your maintenance repair, and you go, wait a minute, who's doing this? Who should be paying for it? And there's money going in all directions. So it's wonderful to see you getting a handle on that.
Thank you. We think that the building assessment piece, we're looking at a lot of different methodologies on how to do building assessments. This first piece, us being kind of the guinea pig on this, is we'll take a look at several different ways to do it. And then my intent is to find the easiest way and the least expensive way, but still provides us enough information to start prioritizing those projects. Then we would literally go out on a campaign to start training our facility managers so that they would have to understand how to do facility condition indices, report that to us, and we could start prioritizing those MRR projects and literally hand the governor's office and the legislature a list of projects that are in critical need. So first steps, baby steps, but we're trying our best to get there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see. Chairman Hurd, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you.
Chairman of most powerful man in the legislature, Chairman of Special Projects Hurd.
Far most powerful, maybe today anyway, the most desirable. My question is concerning the mansion and the repair budget going on there. And the exterior of the mansion, is there anything in this that will go towards exterior rehab or renovation?
Yes, sir. The roof is one of those items that we'd like to look at, but part of this will also be a study of the building. I mean, that's one of the things that I would like to see us happen, is really sit down and take a long, hard look. I've got some things that I have to immediately repair, like the basement, the ballroom, the kitchen, those kinds of things, but there should be enough funds in that $3 million that I can do an assessment of the facility itself.
One of the things that I might suggest, being a member of the American Institute of Architects, I know that there's a lot of concern in the design community over the aesthetic appeal of the governor's mansion. And I think that you put out an RFP or a request to the design community, you're probably going to find some volunteer work out there that would give some good ideas that would improve the aesthetics of the mansion, and possibly there's contractors out there that might be willing to do the work that we spoke of earlier.
We are definitely going to try everything we can. And I completely agree with you on the aesthetics piece. We think one of the worst piece of aesthetics on that building is that metal roof. That metal roof really needs some serious consideration about how we move forward. In addition to it leaking, that's not really what we should have on the mansion. And so those are some of the things that we would like to look for. And I can tell you that we are asking for help from the architectural community in a number of fashions for free work. One of the things that we are also looking at is the hangar out at DOT at the air terminal. We're going to be asking folks to help us look at some of those design issues as well, to see if there's a way that we can make that more friendly and more economic development friendly. So we have asked the community, and we will do so. But thank you.
Thank you. I'm just thinking outside the box. Sometimes we have to do that. A couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, I think it was in Arkansas, they were either rebuilding the governor's mansion or completely redoing it or something like that. And I'm almost sure it was in Arkansas. And they put up a double wide, some kind of big double wide. At Governor Huckabee, and the First Lady said she liked it so much that she just assumed they kept the double wide. I won't proceed that any further. But what would the value be of the governor's mansion and the property that's on out there? I know that's a very expensive
Yes, sir.
area out there.
We have not had that property appraised, but that's something we could easily do. I wouldn't even fathom the guess. I really don't know the property value on personal homes and that kind of thing. I really focus more on the commercial side of things. So I'd hate to even guess, Mr. Chairman.
I'm just wondering. It is. From my perspective, and I'm not an architect, but it is an ugly building.
Yes, sir.
It's just too ugly for the governor of our state to have as a.
We don't disagree with you at all, Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to ask on these funds now, since this is the 07 amended budget. It's a fair good amount of funds. Do you see that these could be spent, as appropriated by the 07 budget in the timeline that it would need to be spent in?
The beauty of this is that we're an authority, so our money goes from year to year. It does not lapse. But just to be honest with you, is I'm ready to go on the structural repairs of the mansion right now. I'm literally just sitting waiting on funding. We've already done the assessment from the geotechnical engineer. I've already paid for that. I've paid for the architect to do the design on that repair. So I'm literally kind of sitting on go waiting for the construction money. As far as the GBA, the archives building, we've already gotten estimates from some of the local demolition contractors on that.
Right.
So we've got those numbers ready to go, and we're literally just ready to write a scope of work and go with that. So yes, sir, we could spend this money pretty fast.
Okay. And then also you had mentioned the rate increase for 08. And what was that? What was the rate?
It's 67 cents is what we're requesting.
67 cents.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we'll be happy to, believe me, we'll bring you back tons of information on that. Most of that, Mr. Chairman, is around two things. One, our health care costs have increased, just the salary increases from the previous year, and also $1 million for utilities. I'm sure I won't be the only person in here discussing utilities, but our utilities increased significantly, and we are looking for ways. One of the things, the reason I'm looking so closely at the Twin Towers as far as programming, is looking for ways to cut costs on energy. We took a pretty good hit, $1.5 million, $1.4 million last year, just in utility cost alone. Now, Jeep has been doing a lot of work with us. Now the state is considered one entity when it comes to Georgia Power. So we now have a lot more buying power, and Jeep has done a great job with that. We are also working with Jeep on the gas piece as well as part of the energy plan to see if we can't become that one entity as well to buy as the state of Georgia instead of University of Georgia, Georgia Building Authority, and all these other entities, because we all are paying different rates. So that's really what the rate increase would be about.
And on this 08 increase, now when did OPB know about that?
September, when we submitted the budget request.
So then it is possible, and I haven't looked at 08 for audits, but it is possible then for audits that that still wouldn't be in there, that would not have been in their original
Russell knows. Russell Hinton knows.
He knows
yes, sir.
Now,
he is.
He
I don't know if he knew in September, but I doubt that he did. But I can assure you, Russell knows. He's on my other board at GISFIC, so we've had discussions about this rate increase.
Okay.
So you may hear from Russell, but he definitely knows about the situation.
Okay, we will make sure Russell knows that we know. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I don't see anything else.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
My pleasure. And thank you again for letting us go last today.
You're welcome.